Is it really time to think about abolishing the United States Senate? In my personal opinion, yes, it is. And more Americans every day are coming to the same conclusion. So why should we abolish the U.S. Senate? Mainly, in short, it's because it's where all legislation that helps the American people goes to die. Also, which leads to number two, it's undemocratic. You basically have 100 elected officials here that are able to override the hundreds of representatives in the House and say, no, we don't agree with this bill, we're going to change it in some way. Normally it's to benefit their donors and take away from the American people. And then if they pass that, they send it back to the House for final ratification. Okay, wait a minute. It goes to the House, goes to the Senate, goes to the House, then goes to the President's desk. Honestly, this is just yo-yoing back and forth needlessly. It really is. My opinion is what we should do is get rid of the United States Senate. These people mostly are just bought off by corporations anyway. I mean, so are the majority of the House of Representatives. But at least if you were to reform the House into a more proportionate representative body, it's almost like a parliamentary system, you would actually have a much better time trying to get legislation through that helps the people because it is fundamentally more democratic. Now, what I mean by proportionate representation is you would effectively recognize, both at the state and federal level, immediately in the Constitution, this would require a constitutional amendment, so it is difficult, but it can be done. It's something that's positive and we should work towards it. But you effectively, at least at the federal and state level, let's keep it on the federal level right now for the sake of this discussion, at the federal level, you would recognize all the parties in the country and say, okay, which parties are going to run everywhere? Well, it would essentially be every party, right? Every party in every election cycle gets to run their candidates if they so choose. If they choose not to, that's fine as well. But they would essentially have ranked choice voting at the national level here. And the more of the parties that you get in this representative body, the more you would have to build a coalition. You would have to form a government that represents the people. And you would have a much easier time doing that because in a ranked choice voting system, people are able to vote their conscience. They're not forced to vote between the lesser of two evils. Getting rid of the Senate and expanding the House of Representatives is a way to keep things democratic, keep the representatives closer to the people. Another aspect of this is you look at what they did with the CARES Act where they basically voted everything over the phone. Well, I'm like, well, why can't we do something like that at the national level all the time? Why should we have to keep sending people to a specific city once they get elected? You know what that does? It takes them away from their constituents, puts them in a position where they can go, oh great, nobody's watching over my shoulder. Now I can line my pockets at their expense. Hey, Merck, Pfizer, Raytheon, Boeing, come on in here. Let's talk turkey. I mean, that's what that does. Sending them to Washington, D.C. does that. Any city, really, would do that. But if you keep it local, you keep every representative that's elected local, and you make them do this on Zoom calls, you do it over the phone, then it's a lot easier for people to hold them accountable. You see where this is going? Because you have, I don't know, what's a good example here? Let's say you were to represent the country by zip code, for the sake of argument, okay? Now, this was proposed by Jill Stein of the Green Party. Now, how many zip codes are there in the United States? There's around 41,000. You know what that makes? That makes for 41,000 representatives in the United States House. That's a lot. So if you were to go into counties, you would still be in the thousands, but it wouldn't be 41,000. So let's say you did it by county, okay? I don't know how many thousands of counties there are. Anybody knows any better, let me know. In fact, I'll look it up. But if you were to do a more proportionate representation that way, number one, it would be a lot hard to gerrymander, okay? Zip codes and county representation, it would be a lot much harder to gerrymander. So you kind of take away a little bit of that power. Second of all, you keep your representatives in their respective districts or counties, whatever, to make sure that their constituents can keep an eye on them. All right? If they're that close to their constituents, you can bet they're going to feel those eyeballs on their shoulders. And they're not going to be as willing or as able in many ways to be as corrupt as they want to be. And also, this kind of leads to people like, well, maybe if we can't be this corrupt, why would we want to run for office? Or those who do and end up getting elected are like, I want to change this back to a system where we can be corrupt. Well, that's going to be a lot easier said than done, given the situation, because you're not going to a specific city now, in this case, Washington, D.C., to be able to do that. You're kept in your district. You're doing things remotely. A lot more people can see what you're doing. A lot more people are going to be looking over your shoulder and being like, hey, what are you doing there? You're being corrupt. We're not going to have that. And it'll be a lot easier to do recalls on certain people as well, at least on the state level. So this is another reason to abolish the Senate, okay? Because if you can set up a system where the House of Representatives serves as the official legislative body, and you decentralize the function of that body to where you keep all the representatives in their separate districts where they can do things remotely, or hell, it doesn't even have to be there. They could be traveling the world and still conduct business like that. But at the very least, you're not condensing them in a specific location where they start developing these friendships and they start getting personal with each other, and they're like, oh, I would love to represent my constituents, but I don't want to offend my friends over here. You're elected to serve the people, not kind of honor a friendship with somebody who was an elected official elsewhere, stabbing your constituents in the back. That's not what you're elected to do. So this also helps in that regard. Another way to do this would basically be, okay, if you were to have a system that's decentralized and expand proportionate representation, you would have to have at the national level, district by district, a way of recalling a representative if they're not serving the interests of the people. And say, okay, what we're going to do is essentially evaluate you here. We're going to question you. We're going to ask you, what have you done? How are you helping us? Whoa, wait. And let's say you're Joe Manchin, okay, and his constituents in West Virginia. Let's say he's a representative at this point, okay? I know he's a senator, and I'm saying abolish the Senate. But let's change the facts here for a moment and say that he's a representative in the House, okay? So if that's the case, you get Representative Manchin back to his district, and let's say he's being as corrupt as he is right now. The constituents there, the city councils that make up that, or even the constituents could go in there and say, Mr. Manchin, what have you done to represent us? And he would make his case. Okay, how is that? Because this is what's been happening. He would have to try to defend that, and the process would go on. And at the end of the day, the constituents would make the decision, okay, we are choosing to remove you because you're not representing our interests, and we're going to hold a special election. That would be a much better way of doing that, because the people have the real power here. One thing that practice would do is it would take the power of impeachment away from the House of Representatives and put it in the hands of the voters. But you would have to file a recall, and it would have to be agreed upon by the majority of city councils that make up the constituency, in this case an entire county, okay? And they would have to send that notice to that representative, who would then have to, of course, make a speech to the House saying, I've been recalled, we'll see what happens, and so on. And then they go through the process. And if they leave, I can guarantee you Joe Manchin would be kicked out of there instantly. And they would have to hold a special election to replace him. So that's one idea. Another reason for abolishing the Senate is because you're basically getting rid of a level of bureaucracy that simply serves to stifle the democratic process. So what happens here? This goes back to what I was saying before about how 100 people could effectively override the hundreds of other voices that currently exist in the House. This layer of bureaucracy is just meant to whittle down anything that doesn't serve the donors, is effectively what it is. Now, you got some good apples in here. You've got Bernie Sanders, you've got Jeff Merkley, to a lesser degree, you've got Elizabeth Warren. But other than that, really, it's just a bunch of corporate tools in there that don't care about the American people. So get rid of the U.S. Senate for that reason as well. And because of this recall system that I outlined, it's a much better way of addressing corruption. So if somebody does act in a corrupt manner, the constituents will notice the results, they'll look into what they're doing, and they can see, hey, wait a minute, this representative or these representatives are being corrupt, they're not representing us. And they would say, okay, we're going to recall you, and we're going to evaluate you, essentially. And if we determine that you're not fit for the job anymore because you're being corrupt, we're going to oust you, vote you out, and we're going to hold a special election. That's how that would work. So when it comes to that, you also got to take into account what role the media would play. Now, when on its face, and I've mentioned this in a video before, in a proportionate representative system, the media wouldn't know what to do, right? I mean, they would be lost because they're specifically set up to be Democrat, Republican, good guy, bad guy, whatever that might be, whichever direction it might be, I should say. So if you have multiple parties in this particular type of environment, the tribalist corporate media would essentially lose its purpose. They would be like, what are we going to do now? Well, now they have to adopt to a multi-party system. That makes it a lot harder for them to make the case for a pro-corporate agenda. So this kind of forces the mainstream media in many ways to adapt to the times and better represent the people with the information they present. You see, because if the people are able to recall representatives, even if they're cozying up to the media might try to spin it, but it's going to be harder to make that case because the voters see what's going on and they are actively determining what to do with their representative if they misbehave. And they're going to be like, wait a minute, good guy, bad guy, but Democrat, Republican, but there's not, oh my God, what do we do? They'll be lost, man. They'll be forced to bend the knee to the people like, hey, you better start telling us the truth. You better do your jobs. You need to hold the powerful accountable. You need to keep them in check. And I can revert back again. It was like a little over a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago at this point, that New Zealand reporter, I don't know her name. I keep forgetting to look her name up. But she had that great interview against Jamie Lee Ross of the National Party, which is the New Zealand Conservative Party. That went viral, and it should have, because she did a tremendous job. Slowly but surely, this could incentivize the media to go in that direction, as it should be. So abolishing the Senate has a number of positive benefits here. Now, obviously, it requires a constitutional amendment. It requires reforming the entire electoral process. But it's going to be all worth it in the end if it happens. And I think we should fight for it. I know I'm definitely fighting for it. So let's jump on board with this, guys. Let's do what we can. Let's try to come up with a way to reform this system, get rid of the Senate, get one legislative body aside from two, and expand it and decentralize it in a functional way so that it's not sending them to Washington or to any singular city where they're away from their constituents. We have the technology. We have the means to keep them in check. Let's create a system that allows us to do just that.